Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Luckily, these sing-alongs, I found a section where I've got music singing the sing-along parts for me. So if my voice goes out, I don't have to worry. But first, my little talk. So am I a co-host? Yeah. Yeah. Transliteration. Okay, this one, I've got it on the screen. I'm going to enlarge it so that it'll be easy to read. I found something that should save the day for us. Okay, so now, that's my little topic discussion. We'll go into the idea of the infinite one. And since infinite is endless, I'm not going to talk endlessly. I will keep it within a normal amount. And if I see this going long, I'll just split it into next week. But we've been talking about 3 pillars of Judaism. So I started with the people, and then go to our way of studying and learning Torah. And now finally, what do we believe? Which would be centered around God. And that's the only, at this point, we can actually go to that question to get to what are we about. And we are looking at a God who asks questions, right? When he introduces, when he talks to the human being, mentioned it last week, this is a God who asks questions. Ayeka, where are you? Where are you? And my teacher, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, said, it's interesting. Judaism doesn't care what we believe about God. It is very worried about what God believes about human beings. That's the point. So what can we talk about? We have to recognize this. Religion in Jewish thought did not begin with Moses and did not begin even with Abraham, right? Not even with right? It's we go back to Hanoch. Hanoch is one of the descendants of Adam before the time of Noah, who's described as V'yitalech Hanoch et Elohim. Noach is walking in the presence of God or with God. So, and then he is taken up to heavens rather than dying, right? So there's a whole bunch of traditions about who is Hanoch, what does it really symbolize, but here's a human being before the time of Noah who is walking the path of God. And also in rabbinic tradition, Noach, the sons of Noach are rabbis. Who is that? Shem and Ever. Shem, from which we get the word Semites, right? Of the 3 sons of Noah, has Oil Shem. He has an academy, according to the rabbis. An academy studying Torah. Before there's a Torah, before they're Jews, before they're Hebrews, before Abraham. And Ever, from which we get the word Hebrew, right? From whom Abraham is descended. Also, Oil Ever, right? Academy of Ever. Again, ancestors of Abraham. So why are the rabbis saying this? The idea is that religion is not something exclusively for the Jewish people. It's not something that only Jews have. We have our particular way, but it's something that all humanity has. We share. So if anything, today's Torah portion, the rabbis take as proof God speaks to peoples, right? Bilam, proof that God speaks to people around the world. And Eov, what do we put into the book of the Bible? The book of Job, Eov, who is of Eretz Utz. Eretz Utz is Edom. It's not Hebrew, not Israelite, but he's a God-fearing person. God talks with him. He appears to him out of the whirlwind, right? As a righteous person, and clearly not an Israelite. Huh? Edom, yeah, but they're pagans, all right? They're not Israelites, they're pagans. Keep distance between the two. The Judeans didn't like the Edomites. You read what they say about them. They don't like them. So Eov, the great hero, is Edomite. It would seem the Eretz Utz is part of Edom. So what do we have a point? It's the sense that what has happened is that rather than encountering God as individuals, as is more or less the case, it is here a people that has encountered God. And that's the particular Jewish aspect, particular Jewish perspective. So in the Torah, we have more of a sense of who God is not than who God is. And it is interesting, Torah doesn't tell us to believe in God. Nowhere does it say you must believe in me. It says you got to listen to me, got to follow my directions. Believe, well, if you're listening to me and following, okay. Why? Because it's understood. I mean, you understood there's a God. My question is, what's the relationship to me? It's like this thing, I know there's a sun, there's a moon, I know there's a God. Don't give me a proof. I see this table. That's the thinking. That's the thinking. Now what's important is, what about it? I see a table. What about the table? I see a sun. What about the same thing? I understand there's a God. Now, what about it? What about it? So we now have introduction in the Torah to the idea of a God who creates the universe in an orderly fashion, right? It's the opening of Genesis. He establishes the universe in what exists in a systematic and non-chaotic order, which is very different than from the way creation is handled in all the other theories of evolution of the universe in the Babylonians, in the Egyptians, in the Greeks, et cetera, et cetera. Then, of course, we always have the other hand, like Jews, always the other hand, chapter 2. All right, God is a God who walks in the garden in the heat of the day. But what does he do? Why is he now walking in the garden? Because he senses human beings are in trouble, and he goes down, descends to see what has happened to the human being. So now something different. The universe is fine. I don't have a problem with the universe. I have a problem with the human being inside the universe. It's supposed to be my special creation. That is the particular biblical and Jewish perspective. So now, as a result, absent from God is the endowment of physical human characteristics. We use terms for imagery, for poetic imagery, but the physical, right? You should not have any statues, not any images, right? There may have been in earlier levels. There's some theory that if you go to the north, there's a sanctuary in Tel Dan, which is a very ancient sanctuary. It may have been a competition to Jerusalem. And there, what looks like a footrest. Nothing above it. Place where God would have had his presence on earth, and the footrest is to symbolize that presence, no image. Even in the north where they had the golden calf, they had in the sanctuary, there was no sense that this calf was the God. The calf was the throne of God. In the Canaanite image, God rides on the calf, where you have the image of Baal on the calf. Here there's the calf, no image. Even in the north, they have the sense. All right, in sanctuary in Jerusalem, there's a throne, 2 angels, nothing above. That's the ark. Again, so there's an absence of the physical characteristics. I say they certainly have been removed. We have references to it, but they're now made as metaphors. And there's also an absence of sexuality from God. In the ancient universe, everything is yin and yang, male and female, plus and minus, right? So the gods are male and female everywhere around the world, and they're always getting in troubles. And here, let's get rid of the troubles. Boom, one god, all right, so he's male. Okay, because that's how men made him, right? But later on, we add the feminine aspect in Jewish thinking to that image. But again, the idea, not a physical sexual God. And there may have been in ancient Israel a consort. We see some references to it, but certainly not eventually acceptable in that thought. So God no longer has human endowments, but very much in reverse then, this very flawed and failed human being who's constantly involved in wars and rape and all the bad things on earth is now endowed with divine attributes. What is that? Wisdom, creativity, and the power to choose between good and evil. And those are attributes of God, and they're given to the human being. Modified sense, but there. And hence, the Garden of Eden is close to the human being because we have the ability to discern good from evil, and we have the ability to choose evil. So given that, we can no longer be in the Garden of Eden. Now we're in the real world, right? But it's still the human being in the Tselem Elohim. So the rabbis have a beautiful statement in which there's a parade of Roman soldiers, and the soldiers are announcing, make way for the gods, make way for the gods. The rabbi looks at it and says, gee, that's funny. Says, with us, it's the opposite. Whenever human being walks down the street, there's a band of angels announcing, make way for the image of God. In other words, the human being now becomes encompassed with the idea that the human being now has something of God, godlike, to be respected in the same sense. Very similar. So now we have other ideas that the Bible is introducing to us, which is God is the source of justice. And that's reflected back on Abraham, right? The famous story, God is going to go down to Sodom, see what's happening. And he says, why do I need to go to talk to Abraham? Because he will teach his descendants tzedek u'mishpat. His job is to teach his descendants doing that which is righteous and just. And so I have to talk to him about what's happening in Sodom. And then Abraham rises up to the challenge and says, Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, right? He's setting mishpat. Abraham's going to teach his children mishpat, justice. Abraham challenges God's justice. Well, obviously implicit in it is God knows what he's doing, but he lets Abraham look into it and observe it, right? Understand, God is the God of justice. Shofet kol haaretz. Then another concept. God is the player in human history. So human history is not random. Human history is not chance. Human history is not up and down, up and down, up and down without any purpose, which is what the way the Greeks saw it. There's no history. Now, rather, the Greeks have a sense of history is you've got a golden age, it goes down to a silver age, comes down to an iron age, then the brass age, the worst one. That's where we are. That's their view, all going downhill. Not so here. What does Joseph tell his brothers when they come to him? And they wanted to spare them. And he says, no, you meant bad. God meant it for good, to save many lives. Joseph understands this is an action of God in history. What looks bad is a working out of some kind of greater plan. And he doesn't even know, because he saves many lives talking about the Egyptians. He doesn't understand this, the Exodus is coming. All right? So Amos universalizes it. As much as Jews felt different, I said Amos universalizes it to all humanity. He says, Halo kivnei kushim atem li b'nei Yisrael. You are like the Ethiopians to me. They're the farthest. Ethiopians basically meant the farthest people that we know about as you go down south. Same peoples, right? Dear to me. Halo et Yisrael heleti. I brought you out of Egypt. I brought the Egyptians. I brought the Philistines from Kaftor. Philistines, I brought them from the Mediterranean seas. Kaftor is probably Crete. And then Aram Mekir. The Arameans, I brought them from Kir, which is further north. I brought them back, and there have been some wars. They've been exiled. I brought them back in. God is the actor of history, of all human history. So we Jews are different in the sense that we are very sensitive to it. We're aware of it, but all humanity is acting out some divine process. Later on, philosophers will talk about an evolution of human development, like Hegel and so on. Marx would turn it on his head and talk about economic development. But it's the same working out of this sense that there's some force that is ordering human history. Of course, philosophers have questions if that really is true. That's a whole different argument. But we also have here finally, then, what else are we coming into? The idea of a unity of God. Obviously, you all know the Shema, right? Lord our God is one. So that word one lends itself to many, many concepts. One word, many concepts, right? That's how it is with Jews. What? Echad can mean the soul alone. It is not to be identified with any other God. Maybe there are other little gods. This is the only God for us, alone. The soul one, not worshipped with any other God, not worshipped together with any other semi-God, demigod. Unique, right? Completely other, completely different from that which exists, any entity, power, force. The only God, in other words, that all the other gods that the nations around us have are myths. They are fabrications of humanity. And so in the prophets, you have this, the guy takes a piece of wood, he chops it, he cuts it into a shape, puts one half, makes it his idol, the other half he puts into the fire to keep himself warm, and then he bows down to the idol from the same piece of wood they just set to fire so he would stay warm. Right? Making fun of the whole idea of paganity in which divine elements are seen in physical objects. So, yeah. Good. So Maimonides says, yeah, actually, when God says, I am the Lord your God, that's a command. Maimonides says, yeah. But it is, in the sense, it's never phrased as a direct command. It's an assumption. So if you assume that there's a God, you can't have another God. Right. So you can't have another God, I can tell you directly. Yeah. Maimonides goes that route because he's a philosopher. He says, yeah. You know. Right. But it's because it's presumed understood. It's presumed understood, like, That's it. You know it. Knowing it is, if you know it, you don't have to believe. Why do I say that? It's Buber would explain this way, that when we look at the way belief is used in Jewish sources and in Christian sources, Christian sources refer to the term pistis, and that's in New Testament, and that is absolute faith in something where you have no proof of any kind. And he says the word emunah, from the same word as amen, is I rely on. And so it's a different mental state. That's it. That's the way to look at it. Different mental state. Yeah. They felt it. Yeah. It's intuited. Yeah, but it's intuited. That's different. It's intuited. They saw him. Yeah. Of course, then they ran away as soon as they saw him. But that's yeah. That's because I don't like what God's telling me. That's different. Yeah. Ro'im et hakolot. They see the voices. They don't see any image. They see the thunder. They see... Yeah, we can't. Don't let us see, because nobody can see God and live. This idea of seeing God, you're only dead when you see God. That's it, right? No, we don't want to be there yet. But they ro'im et hakolot is very interesting. They see the voice. In other words, the command from God, it becomes visualized, but not the visual image. All right, very important, that distinction. So what else? Also, this idea about echad, we separate ourselves from the concept in paganism, multiple forces, multiple values in the universe. We also distinguish ourselves in that from what is emerging towards the end of the biblical period, which is the very strong philosophy of Zoroastrianism, which is very widespread, and is the religion of the Persian conquerors. And they're the very people who save us from exile, and generally are very favorable towards Jews. And relationships are generally good. Once in a while they go sour, but generally better. So, but in that, the universe is a conflict between good and evil, light and dark, with the belief that good will prevail. So we want to be on the force of good, not the force of evil. But Isaiah rejects even that good will prevail. He rejects even that. He says, Yotzer or v'rechoshech, oseh shalom et ra. Creates the world, and all, here, let me enlarge the screen a little bit. Yeah. Let me make that smaller. Yeah. He fashions light and creates darkness, who makes peace and creates evil. Borei ra. Ani Adonai oseh kol ela. I do all this. You know, there's all that goes on. The yin and the yang, the plus and the minus, the creation and destruction, all those are the outcome of God. So there's a God then who is above and beyond all the contradictions of existence, the underlying unity of all that exists. So when things contradict, they contradict to us, but it is an apparent contradiction, not a consequential contradiction, right? Another thing in Jewish thought, a God who is above and beyond all that exists and yet is immanent. It was directly felt, right? Transcendence. You know, the early American philosophy of transcendentalism, which is a quasi-mystical sense, the God above and beyond all self. Some of the great poets were in that movement. And in Jewish thought, we have this transcendental, but at the same time, immanent, a felt presence. So the rabbis give an example, right? They take Isaiah, by the way, and they modify Isaiah. They get rid of who creates evil, makes peace, and creates all. That's in the morning benediction. So, where am I? Yeah. So let's go back in my thinking. So it's not only God who is creating the past tense, but as we say in the morning prayers, mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshit, one who renews the creation every day. So actively involved in the continuing action of creation, not the idea of deism where you have the master clockmaker who winds a clock and it goes on forever. The medieval philosophers, not Jewish, the Catholic Church, they have this idea, a very good one that sounds nice. Causa in esse, causa in fieri. God is the cause of existence, and God is the cause of the continuation of existence. Because just because you make something doesn't mean it keeps on working. Somebody has to grease the wheels. So this idea of a God who is beyond everything and yet presence is embedded in the prayers, in the structure of the prayer. Every time we say Baruch Atah in a blessing, it's a contradiction. Why do I say contradiction? We say Baruch Atah, I'm talking to God. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God. Hamotzi, the one who brings bread. Asher Kishon, the one who sanctified us. So we're shifting from personal to the distant, this back and forth shifting. We want to have this sense of both understandings, that which is distant and that which we're approaching. By the way, just another thought, unlike European languages, when in European languages you want to sense some of these very familiar close, you have what's called tutoyer, tu in French and Spanish, du in German and Yiddish, right? Bible Hebrew doesn't have it, has ata, just as modern English has only you, right? English went to the thou, but thou has a sense of distance because it was left over from earlier English. So we don't understand as thou is there because it means very personal, like a father, right? Very close. Martin Buber would play on this, and he had his theory of I, thou, which was translated as ich du, I, thou, and Hesch would expand it to we, thou. This is collective, but it's still this do, we're personal. So now we have to ask this thing, do we have a systematic theology? See, Maimonides would talk about systematic theology, but we don't, historically. When it came to action, we had a method of analysis and a way of ordering our collective behavior, right? Very systematic, able to do this. Can be debating and so on, but it's very structured, very analytic. When it comes to belief, the whole system is different. We relied on metaphors, literary phrases, poetic terms, free flow, free association of thought, much as in Freudian free association. You have a word and then you suddenly find another word somewhere else in the Bible and you connect the two and you come and use that as an excuse to come with all sorts of stories. That's how the faith mind works. So how do we come to belief? Right? How do we come to belief? Beautiful story. It's attributed to Abraham. Obviously it's later. Okay, obviously it's later. And it gives us a parable of a man who's walking from place to place, and then he sees a castle aglow, a castle, a fortress aglow. Daluk means it's burning in flames. And he says, is it possible the castle lacks a person to look after it? And then the owner of the castle comes and he says, I am the master of the castle. It's not ownerless. So what happens with Abraham, they say, was similar. He says, is it possible this universe lacks someone to look after it? He sees a universe aflame. It's trouble everywhere. There's got to be somebody to look after it. And then God approaches him and says, I am the master of the universe. So when you look at the world, for its grandeur and for its problems, you say, somebody behind it. That's the perception. So as I say again, for the sages also, this is in the Bible, came out of a personal and collective expression. And now when we come to describing God, then we use physical images, we use verbal images, we don't use pictures so much, except you saw, Carmen, you saw the picture in the synagogue, because we borrow what's from our neighbors, it looks good, we borrow it. But we don't mean it. We add the word kiviyachol, as if it were. We could use this word, if it was for real, we could use this. Or where it says the blessing of the Amida, Ha'el HaGadol VaNorah, the God who is wonderful and amazing. And so the story is of a cantor who keeps on going on and on and on and on, all the wonderful things God does. And the rabbi shuts him down. He says, look, if Moses didn't use the words Ha'el HaGadol VaNorah, we wouldn't say it ourselves. He says, why? This is like a guy who comes into a palace loaded with treasures and he sees some pennies and he picks them up. He says, you don't understand. You can't express it. You can't express it. So we use a language kiviyachol, as if it were. And so the example is the Song of Songs. Pharaoh mounts a stallion in the Song of Songs, and it is the Holy One, as if it were, reveals himself on a stallion, right? Using the metaphor. He's not on a stallion. It's as if it were. And so this goes on in rabbinic stories. God is Shekhinah, God is a presence, felt among the collective, the people. Shekhinah begalut, we're in exile, God's presence is in exile. We're suffering, God is suffering. Right? Very human phrases, very human terms of phrase. Another word used in the Bible, which is really much more philosophical, the word makom. The world is not makom, right? It is shu mekomo shel olam ve'en olamo mekomo. He is the space of the world, but the world is not his space, right? Place of the world. And it comes from Jacob, in the story of Jacob leaving, and he says, Vayifga b'makom. He stumbles on a place. And the rabbis interpret it, he says he stumbled upon God. And there it says also where he talks to Moses, there is space with me, in Makomiti, when he talks to him about the golden calf. Remind you, there's plenty of space inside of me. The world is inside. The universe is inside me. I am not inside the universe. Right? That's maybe as close to a philosophical description as the rabbinic midrash could do it. Greeks did a much better job of organized reason. Give credit to them, and some of them did influence Jewish thinking. In the first time that we came across the Greeks, by the time we came across the Greeks the second time through Islam, we were very open to the systematic thinking. So we had Philo of Alexandria, applies Greek method of metaphors to the philosophical concepts of the Bible, and he influences Christianity much more than Jewish sources. But later with the rise of Islamic civilization and their discovery of Greek thinking, we're very much into it. So you have a great leader, Rabbi Saadia Gaon, applies what's called Neoplatonism to the concept of the realm of Jewish thought. Neoplatonism, we have this idea of the out of God emanations of different philosophical entities that then are actually the functioning of the universe. And of course, the most controversial, we have somebody like Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, Rambam, who turns Aristotle into a Jewish thinker almost. And he writes this in his very cryptic Guide for the Perplexed. And he says in the Guide to the Perplexed, says, look, I'm going to be making all sorts of hints that only the very brilliant students will understand. It's intended for a few students. But then he also took the same kind of thinking and he put it into his Mishnah Torah, which is the guidebook that he designed for all Jews. And it opens up with the question of belief. He starts out with the question in the Mishnah Torah, yeah, you have to believe in a God. That is Rambam who puts it. But when it comes to defining God, also Rambam goes and he says, look, we can only know negative attributes. We can only know what God is not. We can use words about God, but then we have to modify them and say, what we really mean is that it's not what we think it is. So if we say God is good, it cannot be in any sense that a human being can comprehend. So essentially, what we can do is whittle away at what God is not. We can never come to what God is. It's the negative attribute. Okay. And if anybody believes that God has attributes, that's like saying the Shema, but believing there are many gods. Right? This all one single entity. Okay. Some philosophical proofs, and I'll wrap it up, and then we go to singing. They have a first mover. You can't have an infinite chain of causes, although Rambam himself claims he could have proved it otherwise. So there must be a first unmoved mover to start all motion. And then go to the Christians. So they have some very neat philosophy. Saint Anselm, God is that than which a greater cannot be thought. And since I can think of existence, and to exist is greater than not existing, therefore God exists. It's very neat. It's a very nice thing. But philosophy, as I said, is the handmaiden of theology. It's nice company, can't beat the real thing. So we go from philosophy, we also have Kabbalistic thought, when God is from an unfolding God, from Ein Sof, infinite, or Ein no thing, to Chochmah Bina Dat, the three top, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and the Sfirot, the different elements whereby God's forces are manifest in the universe. It is basically God is a flow chart. You see a typical Kabbalistic imagery here with English translation for us. You see the Ein Sof above all, manifestation Keter Chochmah Bina, then the male and female. There's also the male and female sides, these Chesed and Gvura, Tiferet, Netzachot, Yesod being the masculine entity, and Malchut being the feminine entity. It is the connection with the masculine and feminine that brings God into communion with the world, Malchut. And or as later Kabbalistic thought would have, it's the disjunction between the masculine and the feminine, the break between this world and the divine world that comes from Adam's fall, Adam's sin, and that is our job as Jews, is to bring that back together. All right, and then we come full round where he said God is no image. We now have the form of Adam Kadmon, the perfect primordial human being. Yeah, and we understand that in the Kabbalistic thought, in the human being is embodied an image of the elements of God, right? A little bit of, right, putting the image right back in where we took it out. So those are our thoughts about God, the way Jews approach God, the way Jews think of God. Okay, all right, fun time. I said, we're going to try some singing. And I looked for some sites where I could have the words and the music along with the words. So I found this one. I'm going to put this on up for us. And this is a website, it's just interesting, called langeasy.com. And he goes to several cities around the world, and he talks about visiting and what you should see and so on, and then sample songs from each country. So he put a large selection of Israeli songs on the list. It was very nice.